Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's review, we have got another installment in my Florida Craft Brewer Spotlight side series, and we're doing another installment for Cigar City Brewing. This is one of my local Tampa, Florida-based craft brewers, easily the most well-known brewer in the state of Florida, and consistently rated as one of the top brewers in the country. Today we've got two completely different styles, but they are both kind of classic styles here. So we're going to be starting with the Florida Cracker. This is a Belgian-style white ale that's been brewed with coriander and orange peel. This one clocks in at 5.5% ABV. They do mention IBUs on the vast majority of their beers. This one says 15, so it's going to be very, very low on the bitterness unit scale and should be very much a traditional Belgian-style white ale. Beer number two also clocks in at 5.5% ABV. This one is Maduro. This is a brown ale. So two completely different style beers here, both clocking in at the same ABV and both within the same IBU range. This is 20 on this one. I don't know if I mentioned that, but two great beers by one of my absolute favorite local Florida craft brewers, Cigar City. So we're going to get started with the Florida Cracker. This is the Belgian-style white ale brewed with coriander and orange peel, clocking in at 5.5% ABV. Okay, so the first beer for today's Florida Craft Brew side series, Cigar City is the brewer today. This is actually the third Cigar City installment. This is Florida Cracker. It is a Belgian-style white ale brewed with coriander and orange peel. Clocks in at 5.5% ABV and a massive 15 IBUs. So I expect this is going to be a very traditional Belgian-style ale, and they do everything very, very well. So I'm sure it's a great representation. In terms of art, there's not really anything, so to speak. So I'm just going to get this crack, do so gently so it doesn't. All right, I got it. There we go. All right, let's get this poured right in the glass. Oh, yeah. Well, that very much looks like a white ale. They're a super pale yellow. Super pale. All right. Very, very effervescent. Should form a little bit of a head and hold just a little retention, but it won't be crazy. All right. And they tend to be cloudy in appearance. And yep, this is slightly cloudy in appearance. It's very, very active in terms of carbonation. I see mostly medium size carbonation bubbles with some really super fine kind of champagne-like, but it's mostly medium. Looks great. I mean, that looks like a telltale Belgian white. Head looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Oh yeah, that smells like every classic Belgian white ale I've ever smelled. And you can hands down smell the orange peel in there as well. That's a very common additive, as is coriander. Really smells fantastic. It looks fantastic. The head looks exactly how I expected. So nothing more to delay here. Let's jump in. Give it a sip. Mmm. 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 Oh. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they absolutely nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. This is a perfectly executed Belgian-style white ale. It tastes just as they brew them in Belgium, and honestly, this is fantastic. This hits all the boxes for me. It absolutely checks off all of them for this beer style. So, you get that classic Belgian white ale flavor that's got a little spice undertone. The orange peel and the coriander really come through. There's also a hint of like a clovey undertone. I'm sure it's from the yeast that they use, which is very classic for this style as well. But in tandem with that, you get that classic, very grain and baked good-like malt bill that comes through very cleanly. It's orange up front that mixes with the coriander, and then a few seconds after that, you get the full-on smack of the malt bill, and it's very pronounced. It tastes exactly right for the style. I mean, it's exactly right for the style. And it does have a little bit of that slight dry finish. It's slight, it's subtle, it's a subtle dryness, but it's there. This is exactly what I expected, and honestly, for me, I think they nailed it. I'm gonna jump in for body, mouthfeel, finish, and see if I can be a bit more specific here for you. The body is medium, medium light, hovering more towards medium than medium light. It's 5.5%. So that's right, pretty much where I expected. The mouthfeel feels exactly as any Belgian white ale ever has in my mouth. It's got this kind of flat sense to it. It's not a viscous beer style. It's kind of flat. Kind of more or less feels like water with just a slight hint of this dry quality. Even though it's wet while it's in your mouth, you can still tell there's a slight dryness to it. And there's also the constant effervescence because it is a very carbonated beer style. So it checks all the boxes there. In terms of the finish on this is certainly longer than average for the style. It's not outside of the norm, and really for me it's a boon on this. It just has a little more staying power. So you get that lingering malt bill and that lingering orange peel and the coriander, and it's very, very nice. So up front, it's entirely orange peel and coriander. It's just a burst. They were not shy with it. And then several seconds in is when you start to get the malt bill to come through, and that lasts for several seconds, and they kind of peak and mix together, and then it's a slow descent to the end. And indeed, I can still taste that lingering orange, malt bill, and coriander, and it's fantastic. And it's just superbly balanced. Superbly balanced. This is a fantastic beer. This is not a style I drink with regularity. It's really great in the summertime or really any hot day, but it's fantastic. And they absolutely nailed the style. I mean, they just nailed it. This is perfectly executed for a Belgian-style white ale. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to our second beer of today's Cigar City Florida Craft Brewer review, and that is Maduro. It's a brown ale, 5.5% ABV as well, and this one has 20 IBUs. Okay, moving on to the second beer of today's Florida Craft Brewer review. We've got the Cigar City Maduro. This is indeed named after the cigar. It is a brown ale, 5.5% ABV, just as the prior. Only this one has 5 more IBUs at 20. Again, take that number with a grain of salt. It's just the science behind it. Perception is its own animal, which really is the most important thing when we're determining bitterness. Nonetheless, actually in terms of art, yeah, they've got, it's really hard to see because this is a dark brown can, but they've got cigar rollers rolling cigars on the can art. So just another nod to the Tampa heritage. All right. Let's get this one poured right in the glass. I'm fluctuating the speed down the middle here because it looked like it was forming a pretty good head, so I didn't want to go too aggressive once it started. And I think I more or less got it right. That's a pretty decent pour. Visually, yeah, this is a classic brown ale appearance. It's a dark brown. It's typically lighter than a porter, but darker than an amber. Tends to be on the darker end, but somewhere in the middle between those two. This is no different. Very, very effervescent. It's hard to see if you don't have a good light source, but I can see it's very, very active in terms of carbonation. I can see very fine and some medium bubbles coming in, and I'm sure that helped contribute to this lush, thick head on top. Though it's quite active, I'm sure this is going to break down reasonably quickly. Let's give it a sniff. Oh yeah, that smells fantastic. Brown ales are such an underloved beer style for my money, and I think they're fantastic. They kind of bridge the gap between a few different beer styles without leaning too heavily on either end. They have a nice malty backbone, but there's a good bit of deeper, richer roasted malts in there that get starting pushing closer to kind of porter and stout type roast territory, but they kind of split the difference. They kind of hang out in the middle in this interesting land of dark beer styles. And you can smell malt and you can smell roast and a slight sweetness. There's a little caramel on the nose. It smells great. I mean, it just really, really does. I do love this beer style. They're all quite a bit different. So let's jump in and see what this one's about. Oh, it's fantastic. It's a classic brown ale. Oh, after you swallow, it gets quite deep and get some very, very interesting flavors that come into play here. Okay, this is not your average brown ale. This is very, very nice. All right, this is very nice. That was a pleasant and unexpected surprise. Okay, so first thing you should know is the body is medium. It's a medium body. 5.5% on a brown ale, that's where I expect it to be. Mouthfeel pretty much feels like a brown ale. It's got a slight bit of thickness due to the ABV, but it's not a viscous style. It feels mostly flat. It's wet. There's no dryness, and there's a bit of carbonation you can feel in the mouth. This particular brown ale, you start to agitate around the palate to let it coat, and it gets ridiculously creamy. This one just creams up like crazy if you agitate it all in the mouth. Now, first thing when you get it in, the flavor that you do taste, very big, intense malt. You get that classic brown ale malt bill, and it's got this slight sweetness that comes in as well, and then it opens up, and there's bits of caramel that start to come through after the first few seconds when you swallow as that malt character builds in intensity, and then a few seconds after that, it starts to open up to these very rich coffee-like flavors, which I've never had it in a brown ale, and I was surprised by it, but it tastes absolutely fantastic. It's a very pleasant surprise, and it pairs very, very well with the base malt bill that they chose for this one. I'm going to jump back in for finish and balance and see if I'm missing anything else. It's really, really good. Up front, in tandem with that base malt flavor and the slight sweetness, you do get a very cereal-like, a very grainy flavor to the malt. So it's not just caramel, kind of those rich, malty, kind of generic undertones. You get a very distinct grain-like, cereal-like, almost like a plain Cheerios in a bowl. It's grainy. It's delicious. Then that, yeah, absolutely opens into this rich coffee. It's not a dark, deep roast. It's just like a pungent, well-made medium roast. Just a lot of beans that went into the cup. It's really, really quite nice. The finish, it's not super long. Most brown ales don't have the longest finish in the world, so it's certainly within spec. But this one maybe is a bit longer than average, and I'll tell you what sticks around with me. It's that coffee undertone. It just kind of lingers in the back of the palate, kind of mostly on the very, very back. I'm not getting it up front, I'm getting on the back of the palate, but it's very nice. There's just this subtle little coffee that sticks around. Everything else is gone. It's very clean, beautiful classic finish, amazing beer, very well balanced. This is a very, very fine brown ale. I really love this style. I've had many. I would put this in certainly among the top that I've ever had. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Florida Cracker, this is the Belgian-style white ale brewed with coriander and orange peel. 5.5% ABV on this. Again, Cigar City is based in Tampa, Florida. Starting with the aroma on this was very nice. This was classic Belgian white ale, and the coriander and the orange peel are very classic ingredients to add to this beer style. It smelled exactly right. It was quite a pronounced aroma. Not quite as pronounced as some, but it only missed the mark by a tick. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Moving on to the taste. This was a slam dunk for me. This is exactly what I think about when I get a Belgian-style white ale. This is precisely how they are supposed to taste. It checked off every box. It was just a perfect Belgian white ale flavor, and it had the perfect balance of ingredients, and it was very, very flavorful. The flavors were very intense. It was just a home run of a beer. It gets a 10 out of 10. Body on this. Very much a classic Belgian white ale. If anything, I thought the body might be just a little bit different than kind of the norm, but sitting at 5.5% ABV, it's a little bit higher, so it was a little bit heavier. I took that with a grain of salt. I docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Mouthfeel, textbook Belgian white ale. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finish, very, very long. Each sip was very, very long. The flavors were so pungent and they really stuck around the palate. Even though it wasn't particularly viscous, the flavors were so intense that they just lingered. it gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention, this was perfect. I mean, this could have been poured at a bar easily. Gets a 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this was textbook Belgian white ale appearance. It's that very light, almost straw yellow color, slightly occluded, slightly cloudy. Perfect, 10 out of 10. Balance, they nailed it on this beer. All of the ingredients in the malt bill went in perfect harmony with the orange peel and the coriander they added. Nothing was overpowering. It was all working together to make just this classic beer style, and it was executed masterfully. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I loved it. Subjectively, this is as fine of an example of a Belgian white ale that I've ever had. I've had many Belgian-style white ales. I've had multiple from other Canadian brewers in other countries, but this was a home run. This is exactly what you should be getting when you order a Belgian white ale. They nailed it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this is easily top of the style I've ever had. Even though it's an American brewer versus Belgian, they absolutely nailed it. It gets a 10 out of 10. That brings the total score on Florida Cracker to a 98 out of 100. This could be tied or possibly even the highest rated beer that I've rated to date. I mean, 2 points, and it was just trivial things, just shy. But, you know, it is how it is. It's a really great example of a Belgian white ale. If you're a fan of this style, you cannot go wrong with this beer. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Maduro, the brown ale. Also 5.5% ABV. Starting with the aroma on this one. The aroma was very nice. Very much classic brown ale. You could smell the slight sweetness and the maltiness and a bit of the caramel, but the aroma wasn't super pungent. It was above average. It gets a 7. Taste, absolutely fantastic. Everything that you get in a classic brown ale malt bill came through perfectly and really kind of in the same stages. That malty sweetness, that nice bit of malt, the kind of the caramelly undertones, and this one had another surprise. It had a very kind of grainy back to it. Then it opened up just deep, rich coffee. I absolutely loved it. I didn't expect it. It was delicious. It gets a 10 out of 10. Body, the body was exactly where I wanted it to be for the ABV and the style. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same thing. This was classic brown ale. Everything about it, body, mouthfeel, it had the right weight, it had the right thickness. Gets a 10 out of 10. Finish, just as with the Florida Cracker, each sip of this beer had a very long finish. Now, the intensity wasn't quite as crazy running out to the end, but it lingered. And pretty much what lingered all the way to the end was that coffee. You got that slight coffee that just stuck around on the back of the palate. It was really quite nice. Gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention, did a beautiful job. Formed a really nice head, had really good staying power. I would have thought that it maybe would have retained a little bit better than it did because it bloomed up and formed so beautifully, but it was quite effervescent, and overall it did a good job, but it wasn't quite perfect. I docked 1 point, I gave it a 9. Appearance-wise, this was textbook brown ale. It gets a 10 out of 10. Balance, I think the balance of ingredients in this, a brown ale is one of those beer styles that's very much a story of the malt bill and how it's pieced together. And they absolutely nailed it with this. Whatever they put in there to get the classic brown ale and get that coffee that just kind of sneaked in the back that you didn't expect, that was a genius move and it paid off. And it was beautifully balanced with the classic malt bill. So it was just like getting an extra prize in your brown ale. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I loved it. This is a style that I think doesn't get enough credit, and it really deserves it. It's very delicious, kind of splits the difference between a few different ranges of beers, and kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Finally, as an example of the style, I have had many brown ales over the years, and this is one of the best I've ever had for sure. It checked off all the boxes for me for a brown ale. Just a fantastic beer. It gets a 10 out of 10. That brings the total score on Cigar City's Maduro to a 96 out of 100. So 2 ridiculously high scoring beers. These are upper echelon beers for their style. Hands down, only a 2-point spread apart. If you're a fan of Belgian white ales or brown ales, these are must-seek beers. You will not regret it. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.